friends, it's Christy, and I'm so happy to be back with you on the My Favorite Things YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the new Birdie Brown set, Hug It Out, which features all of these adorable critters hugging. The image I chose to feature today is this large one with all of the woodland critters. It makes such a great focal point on a card. So I've stamped that out in Extreme Black Hybrid ink on some Neenah Solar White cardstock, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I'm going to tackle the bear first since he's the largest image in this little cluster of critters. I'm going to use E41, E42, E43, and E44 to color him in. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my darkest marker, the E44, and lay in my shadows. So I'm going to put on a nice shadow on the right hand side of his body since he's facing toward the left. I'm going to add a little shadow where any of those critters would be casting one on his body. And then I'm also going to add just a bit of shadow on the left hand side, especially on his arm that's tucked behind that squirrel and on his leg that's on the other side of his body. Then I'm going to bring in the E43 and begin to blend that out. I do want a nice soft blend, so I'm using little circular motions with my nib and coloring to break up the pigment of that E44, and that's going to help me minimize any streakiness. I'm also going to use that E43 to lay in a bit of shadow on the parts of his body that I want to be lighter, such as the lower part of his body between his legs and the upper part of his belly where his arm is kind of folded across his body, and then also the right hand side of his face near his muzzle. The places that I didn't want to be in dark shadow, I just wanted kind of a soft shadow there. And then I grabbed my E42 and began to blend out the E43, again using that little circular motion to break up that line and get a nice smooth blend. And I'm going to color in most of the rest of him. I'm still leaving a few little places for that E41 to be my highlight. So I'm going to finish off his face with that and his arm. I'm going to give most of his belly the E41 as well, and then I decided that I wanted one more shade in there, so I pulled in the E40 for just a little highlight in those two places on his tummy. For his ears and his muzzle, I'm going back to my E44 and I'm going to lay in a little bit of darkness there. I'm going to blend out his ears with the E43, so they're just going to have those two shades. And then for the muzzle, I'm also going to add a little bit of the E42 as my highlight. I did a second layer on him off screen just to save some time in the video, but it's something that I like to do because it really smooths out the blend and just increases the saturation of the markers. And now moving on to my raccoon. For the lighter parts of his body, I'm using W00, W1, and W3. So the W3 is my darkest. That's what I'm laying in my shadows with. And for him, it's a little bit trickier because his body is kind of curved in toward the bear. So the bear would be casting a little bit of shadow on his right-hand side. But he's also facing toward the right, and I always like to keep my critters' faces as light as possible, just so you can really see their features. So I gave him a little shadow on both the left and the right, just about equal, a little bit more on the left since he's turned toward the right. And I just blended toward the center with the W1 and then the W00 for the highlight. And then I'm going to start coloring in his tail. I'm just going to skip the stripe that is closest to his body, and then I'll do every other one. And for that, I'm just putting my darkest on the left-hand side, the underside of the tail, blending up with that W1, and then filling in with the W00. I also added a little W00 to his belly, and now for the darker parts, I'm going to use W3, W5, and W7. So my darkest shade from the first combo has become my lightest shade for the darker combo, and that's just going to help tie everything in together. So I started with the W7 for some shadows, and I also colored in his little hands and feet with the W7 and the other stripes on his tail. And again, I just like to really keep the area where the eyes are as light as possible because that's what gives the critters their personality. You know, you don't want to hide their features. So I always like to use the lightest color in my combo over their eyes. And then I took that W7 and W5 and colored in the noses of all of my critters. So everything except for the owl since he has a beak. Next I'm going to color my squirrel, and for him I'm using E33, E35, and E37. So I started with the E37, laying in some nice shadows right under the bear's arm and on the underside of his arm, a little bit to define his haunches and the back of his head, and of course his curly little tail. Then I'm coming in with the E35 and beginning to blend that out and just create, again, that nice smooth blend that's going to make the critters look super soft and furry. And then I'll use the E33 as my lightest. And I did decide to save a little bit of room on the underside of his tail and on the tip of his nose and his belly. And I'll use the E31 for those. Just a few quick flicks of that marker and he is done. So now I'm going to move on to my bunny, and for that I'm using E000 and E00. I just wanted something that would be a little bit different, so I decided to go with kind of a buff color. So I use the E00 as the darkest and then the E000 and let that fade into the white. I'm also going to use the E000 to add a little bit of shading to the areas on my fox that I want to be white. And then for the rest of his body, I will use YR12, YR14, and YR18. So I'm using that YR18 to do some shadows to separate his tail from the rest of his body and define the edges of his little arm and haunches. I'm also going to color the sides of his face about equal since his face is facing almost completely forward. So I'll have a nice highlight in the center. I'm going to blend out the YR18 with the YR14, just making sure to catch the edge of the previous color so that I get that nice smooth blend, and then I'll fill in the rest with the YR12. For my owl, I'm switching to cool grays. I wanted each critter to be distinctly colored on this little card. So I use C0, C1, and C3. I use C3 and C1 for the outer parts of his body, and then C1 and C0 for his belly. And then I grabbed R11 to color the insides of my critter's ears, just give them a little bit of a pink tone in there. I'll add R20 to that mix and color in the little trio of hearts and also the two heart-shaped flowers. So I just put a little R20 at the bottom and blend it up with the R11. And then for the leaves and the grasses, I'm just going to quickly color those in with YG25, just the one shade since it's such a small little area. And once I'm finished with that, I will trim these images out with their coordinating dies. For my focal panel, I've die cut another piece of white cardstock with the Wonky Stitch Rectangle STAX. I used the second smallest die in that set for that panel, and I'm going to stamp a sentiment on the bottom with the Extreme Black Hybrid ink. This is the same ink that I used to stamp my images. It's such a nice crisp black. So I'm stamping out the sentiment that says, "Pretend this is me hugging you for a really long time," which I think is really sweet and great for the times that we are currently living in. So I set that aside and popped my card base in my MISTI. I'm using a piece of snow cone cardstock, scored and folded to a standard A2 size card with a top fold. And I stamped the other little bear image that's hugging the bunnies and the sentiment that says, "Air hugs till we can bear hug," which I just love. I think that's so clever. So now I'm ready to add a little bit of color to my panel. So this will kind of shine out from the edges of my image, I'm taking some tumbled glass Distress Oxide ink and blending that on in a circular motion in the center of that panel right above the sentiment. So I'm just taking my time and not pressing down very hard because I want to create a nice soft blend. And then I can start to adhere my images. So I'm starting with this large one, obviously, since that's the main image in the little scene here. And I'm going to adhere that right above that sentiment. So there's about the same distance between the bottom of the sentiment and that stitch detail as to the owl's head and the stitch detail. I'm going to add the two little heart flowers on either side of my little critter pile. So I've got the larger one over on the side with the bunny. Since the bunny is smaller than the raccoon, I kind of balanced that out by putting this smaller flower towards the larger critter. I'll add my two little tufts of grass in front of those flowers, and that's really going to help anchor those images into the scene and make it look like they're standing outside somewhere. And then I'm going to take this little trio of hearts and add that in the top left corner. For my pattern paper, I'm taking a piece from the Party Plaid 6x6. I just flipped through until I found a panel that I liked. I thought this matched the coloring really well for those little heart images and also the tumbled glass on the background. So I trimmed that out with the largest of the Wonky stitch rectangle stacks, and I'm going to adhere that to my card front. So I've got a little bit of a border of that snow cone cardstock showing on the outside edges. I made sure that that was on there nice and straight and then smooth that down into place. And then I'll grab my focal panel. I've added some foam tape to the back of that. So I'm going to peel off those release papers and then I'll line that up in the center of my card. And once I'm sure that it's right in the middle, I will press that down into place. To finish off the card, I wanted to add just a touch of sparkle. So I'm taking some Stardust Stickles and I'm going to add it to all of the hearts. So I did the little trio and also the heart flowers. And then I also decided to add it to the inside of the critter's ears. So it's basically on all the little pink areas. I just really love the way that this catches the light when you tip it. There you can kind of see how that looks. It's just such a pretty effect. So I'll give you another peek at the inside. And that is going to complete my card for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the January edition of Christy Gets Crafty with My Favorite Things. If you did, go ahead and give the video a like and leave me a comment down below. I love chatting with you guys. Subscribe to My Favorite Things for more inspiring videos just like these here on screen. Bye-bye.